Imagine a person in the wild times of Antiochus IV that are prophesied in Daniel chapter 8. Imagine that person with the wildness, the craziness around him. This sinister man has come to power, persecuting the people of God, so vicious, so violent. But reading Daniel 8 and saying, this was prophesied 400 years ahead of time. The Lord's sovereign. What a rest there is in knowing that the Lord knows. He knows everything. He knows the end from the beginning. And his word is true. In fact, the prophecy ends with verse 26, and the vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told, is true. It's reliable. It's valid. You can rest on it. And that's about how the temple that had been desecrated so violently and so terribly was going to be cleansed. So someone going through it could say, I can't see how this is ever going to happen. And yet the vision of the evenings and mornings, which it was told, is true. So God's word, the faithful lay hold of it, and they get stability and steadfastness to not be conformed to this world that's passing, to not cave in to the pressures of this world, to instead stand up for the Lord and to go forward with God, even if it means death, which it did for many of the people during that time. This prophecy given to Daniel during the 3rd year of Belshazzar, the last king of Babylon, about 10 years before the Medes and Persians conquered Babylon at 539 BC, the prophecy looks out across the next 400 years and looks at the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, visualizes a ram that was unstoppable, verse 4. But then it looks out even farther, 200 years out, to see the Greek Empire rise, which there's no way that could have been predicted by Daniel. To see it rise, and it's pictured as this male goat that comes across the surface of the earth, not even touching the earth because it's coming so quickly to conquer the Medes and Persians. It says about him, he came up to the ram that had the 2 horns, the Medes and Persians, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. Verse 7, and I saw him come up beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. He struck the ram, smashed his 2 horns. The ram had no strength to withstand him. That's exactly what happened when Alexander conquered. And he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat made himself exceedingly great, but once he became powerful, the large horn was broken, and in its place 4 prominent horns came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Now the first half of chapter 8 is the vision. The second half is the interpretation of it. So verse 20 says, the ram which you saw with the 2 horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. Now that was 200 years out. So 331 is when Alexander the Great basically conquered the Medes and Persians. And the shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn that's between his eyes is the first king, Alexander the Great. The broken horn, remember Alexander died 323 while he was still conquering. And the 4 horns that came up in its place represent 4 kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. And so it was, after Alexander died, it was split up into 4 major sub-kingdoms. The 2 that are of most interest going forward in Daniel are Syria, which is north of Israel, and Egypt, which is south of Israel. Details given about their warfare in chapter 11 of Daniel, the king of the north, the king of the south. Here it's just going to focus in on one of those sub-kingdoms and a little horn that comes at the tail end of the Greek Empire. It says in verse 9, and out of one of them, so in one of those sub-kingdoms, came a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, so towards Egypt, toward the east, that would be like Turkey, Asia Minor, and toward the beautiful land, Israel. And it grew up to the heavenly lights, and some of the lights, this is the leaders of Israel, that is some of the stars it threw down to the earth, and it trampled them. It even exalted itself to be equal with the commander of the army. So the Lord himself, he's saying, I'm on the same level as him. No wonder he minted coins, Theos Epiphanes, God made manifest. Well, not only did he think in his mind that he was at the level, he went about business that way because he removed the regular sacrifice from him. So Yahweh, the one true God, you can't have your food, as it's called in Leviticus. I'm taking away your sacrifice from you that was offered in the temple. And the place of his sanctuary, the temple, this is his holy place where he's supposed to be honored, was overthrown. So this desecration of the temple, which Antiochus IV did indeed do, he sacrificed pigs in there, which were an unclean animal. He sets up an idol to Zeus. He rededicates the temple to Zeus. This is the kind of defilement he brings about. But it's not just the defilement of the temple and the taking away the sacrifice, but he also attacks the people of God that are seeking to be faithful to God. He's imposing Hellenism. You need to be a Greek. You have to fall in with our culture, even with its sexual immorality, with its idolatry. So the pressure to conform is there. It's actually mandated. It's not just a tug, like, oh, it'd be nice to fit in. It's mandated, imposed requirements that you have to conform. If you don't, in fact, if you go ahead and circumcise your children like the Lord told you to, you're dead and so are your children. And so this is the kind of viciousness of this man. Well, he attacks the people of God, as verse 12 says, and because of an offense, the army, that's the people of God, will be given to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will hurl truth to the ground and do as it pleases and be successful. So truth, who cares about that? Deception is actually going to be the rule of the day. What a terrible day to live in. And he's successful at it. So as we live in days that might be where deception seems to rule, where truth is hurled to the ground, and then there's success at it. It's wild times, isn't it? It's crazy times. And so this is what the times these people were going to live in, but God was sovereign over it. He called it ahead of time. He said this is what's going to happen towards the end of this Greek Empire. Verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply while the offense causes horror, this desolation, this desecration in the temple of God where this idol is there, so as to allow both the sanctuary and the army to be trampled? They're so degraded, the people of God and the temple. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be properly restored. And so at the end of the chapter, he says, the vision of the evenings and mornings, which was told you, is true. That's what he's referring to. The temple will be properly restored. And it was in 164 BC. But there was a lot of turmoil along the way. This man, Antiochus, rises to power in the 170s, starts to really have bad relationships with the nation of Israel, with the Judea, 171 BC, and eventually desecrates the temple, 167 BC. And so it's not until some years later, 2,300 evenings and mornings is more than 6 years of all this turmoil going on, of this man of deception ruling, and the people of God are going through that wild times with the Lord, that they have to decide to be faithful to him. And they may pay dearly, which many of them did. Many were killed because of their faithfulness to God. In the interpretation, this is what it says about him in verse 23. In the latter period of their dominion, so the tail end of the Greek Empire, when the wrongdoers have run their course, so a king will arise. Isn't that interesting? So it's when the transgressors, when the wrongdoers, the unfaithful to God, have finally come to their ahead, they've run their course, that's when the king's going to arise. So Antiochus was sure that he had come through his own intrigue and got into power, but the timing was of the Lord. He was using it to bring about judgment upon the unfaithful. So the Lord was sovereign, not only in the end, but even during. He was sovereign in it. May the Lord help us to walk by faith in that regard, that we can allow him to use even wicked men like an Antiochus IV to bring about his purposes. Chapter 11, verse 35 says he's going to refine, purify, and cleanse. So the Lord's doing that. I want to go along with the Lord refining, purifying, and cleansing. I myself want to be refined like that. And so God is sovereign in this. Is when the wrongdoers have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. Terrible day to live in, the day when that kind of person is ruling. He's skilled in intrigue, and his power will be mighty and not by his own power. He will destroy to an extraordinary degree, violent, vicious, and be successful and do as he pleases. Terrible to see him successful, but he was. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. He's going to attack the faithful to God. And through his shrewdness, that's his general character. He's very shrewd. He will make deceit a success by his influence, so hurling truth to the ground. It said deception is the rule of the day. What a terrible, wild, crazy day to live in. Will I be steadfast in such a day myself? 2 Timothy 3 says that the last days are going to be wild, difficult days, and it's because of the character of the people in those days. And so it was for these people. And he will make himself great in his own mind. He will destroy many while they're at ease. He did that, for example, through sending a tax collector that talked words of peace. And when the people felt secure, then he viciously attacked them. This is the character of Antiochus, this little horn that was so successful. But he'll even oppose the Prince of Princes, the Lord himself. So he'll be successful. But, the end of verse 25, but he will be broken without human agency. So he's not ultimately going to be successful. Now, this little horn of the Greek Empire, the tail end of the Greek Empire, is not the same little horn of chapter 7, because that was the tail end of the revived Roman Empire, the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7. This is during the third beast of Daniel chapter 7, which is the Greek Empire. But he's a prototype, isn't he? He's gets power, sovereignty. He takes away the sacrifice from the Lord. He desecrates the sanctuary. He persecutes the saints of God, and his character is self, elevation of self. And so he's a prototype of that little horn yet in the future. And so an illustration of being faithful to the Lord, even in the face of such a wicked man, a sinister man, a self-willed man that's vicious and deceptive. Will I be steadfast in such a day? May the Lord encourage us to be people that see him, that walk by faith, that say the word of God is true. I'm going to depend upon God and upon his word, even in wild times when it doesn't seem like the Lord is sovereign after all. May the Lord encourage us.